The X-Men have kinda taken over my channel, and I'm really happy seeing I'm not the only one excited to talk about X-Men characters, with today's character being Vertigo, a semi-obscure X-Men villain. Weird fact about myself, when I was little, about 5 or 6, I thought Vertigo, Enchantress, and Polaris were all the same person. I'm not joking, I legitimately thought they were all one person. This was because my knowledge of Marvel at the time was the animated shows I watched, where I saw just a woman in green and assumed it had to be the same person, even though they had different powers, appearances, and personalities, but they all were green, so clearly that means they're the same person. Vertigo is most known for affiliation with Mr. Sinister, something that's been carried out to multiple different teams and stories: the Savage Land Mutates, the Marauders, and even the Nasty Boys, being one of the only characters to be part of all three. Albeit, her time with the Nasty Boys was only in the animated series, not the comics. But where did she start? That would be as a Savage Land Mutate, first appearing in Marvel Fanfare issue 1 to issue 4 from 1981. Although her origin was technically explained long before she even appeared, in X-Men issue 62 from 1969, the Savage Land Mutates were once a group of normal people living in the Savage Land, but when Magneto took over, he kind of on purpose, but also by accident, created a new group of mutates on this island. This by exposing them to radioactive properties, which would turn them into mutates, but they were creatures. But after other experimentation was done by other scientists, this would lead them into becoming the Savage Land Mutates. They were humanoid, but still extremely powerful. I just summarized what was essentially 5 years of stories into 5 seconds. Although of course not including the other details of any of those other stories, since it's not really important to Vertigo or the Savage Land Mutates or this video. This also makes her a mutate, not a mutant. Or does it? You see, at this moment she's definitely a mutate, but later on something will happen to the character that makes it kind of questionable if she is still a mutate or not, or if she's a mutant now. Since, well, if you're familiar with the character, you know what's going to happen. We'll get to it when we get to it. But also because the character at some points is referred to as a mutant, and it's unclear if that's like a retcon, a revelation, or a mistake. We'll get into all of that later on. In Marvel Fanfare issues 1 to 4, Vertigo would appear as one of the many Savage Land Mutates working under Brainchild. In this first appearance, she has long white hair and a variety of greens and pink jumpsuit, a design that would slowly alter over time. In the first issue, the Savage Land Mutates are fighting Spider-Man, Angel, and Ka-Zar, with the first two having traveled there on the island to find Sauron's innocent alter ego, Karl Lycus, whose last name has a very inconsistent spelling. The heroes encountering the Savage Land Mutates is mainly just an obstacle for them to face, with Vertigo herself not really mattering, just being there as a means to fill out the roster of villains. Although out of the group, she does use her powers the most, including torturing Spider-Man and Angel. Her powers being pretty self-explanatory, she gives people vertigo. Ka-Zar and Karl would save the heroes, with Karl shooting Vertigo in the head, but she survived. How? I don't know. Appearing with the mutates in the final battle where she would lose in a fight with a Nightcrawler, which weirdly becomes a pretty reoccurring thing for Vertigo. I don't know why, but she always goes for Nightcrawler and she always loses. And by the end of issue 4, the additional experimentation done to the mutates would be reversed, being turned back to their male state. Post-Magneto but pre-other experiments, meaning they're now back to being creatures. Yet, oddly when she returned, she was back in her more human-appearing state, with her monster state having been undone with no explanation. This being in the Mutant Massacre arc starting with X-Men issue 210 from 1986, where she's a member of Mr. Sinister's Marauders, which is mainly made up of mutants. In fact, there are points where this group is referred to as being entirely made of mutants, which is incorrect, because Vertigo isn't a mutant. Although, to be fair, I'm not entirely sure if this was actually a mistake, or perhaps it's just an umbrella term since the majority of the team are mutants, and Vertigo not being one just doesn't really matter when you're describing the team. Her design is also a little bit different, now appearing far more as what she looks like nowadays, opposed to what she looked like before. Her reason to be brought back is a little blank. Never mind the state she was left behind in, but also, why would she even be here? She was a Savage Land Mutate, why was she recruited for the Marauders? I think maybe a good theory could be that Mr. Sinister, using his own genetic experimentation, brought her back to this power state, and she was so thankful to him that she became loyal to his word. But that's never been said in comics, it's never been canonized. But I just assume that's probably what happened off-panel? But yet again, we don't know, because it's never been stated. This arc focuses on the Marauders murdering the Morlocks. The Morlocks are a group of mutants with the mutated features that make them unpresentable, resulting in them hiding in the sewers of New York City. This arc would lead into having the most of the Morlocks being killed. Vertigo herself actually kills quite a bit of them. Although her role was actually pretty minor, just a villain to round out the roster with a pretty cool power set. Not much of a personality outside of that. She's a cold killer with no sympathy for anyone, not even children. She would also try her hand at fighting Thor during this arc, but of course that did not go so well for her. She would fight Nightcrawler again during this arc, who knocks her out. Why are they matched so much? They also don't reference their previous fight, so I can't really tell if this was an intentional rematch or if it was just a coincidence. This also isn't even the last time they fight. She does lose again, but now Riptide comes to rescue her from being captured. Her powers do seem pretty useful against the X-Men, even if it doesn't hold them for long. Her powers and design are to me the best qualities of the character. She really does pop with the rest of the Marauders. Her characterization is very baseline cruel, but for a character of this caliber, it does make sense. She also seems to have a bit of an implied friendship with the only other woman on the team, Arclight, but I think it could just be because they enjoy killing. Best friend goals? As a member of the Marauders, she often just appeared with the group, primarily as just a powerful assist such as when she appeared in Inferno. She would also flip-flop between her designs and appearances, going back to the pink with different greens, or just green and white, sometimes having white hair or sometimes dark or light green hair, or sometimes white and green hair. Although even then, I think that she still remained fairly consistent in theme, even if there were occasional color changes with the character, since even though that her outfit often changed, or even hair, she still looked like the same character enough that you knew it was still the same person. I like the green, white, and light green hair look the most. I think the two color match is much better than the mix of greens with pink. In my personal opinion, I think green and pink don't go together, and it kinda off-throws the character's appearance when she has pink and multiple different shades of green. Vertigo and Arclight would also be shown to be part of different teams, joining the all-female villain team called the Femizons, where they would try and fail to fight Captain America. In X-Men issue 13 from 1994, the Marauders would come into contact with Nathan Grey, who would use his powers to create poetic justice. That by having justice for what they did to the Morlocks. Now the Marauders are actually ripping each other apart, like they did with the Morlocks, with Vertigo being murdered by Riptide, who was also the only survivor. But that wasn't the end. In X-Men issue 34 from the same year, we would learn that Mr. Sinister would clone the dead Marauders as a means to resurrect them, having the same powers and memories. This actually introduces something really interesting, because even though this is considered the same Vertigo, she is now technically a clone of the original. People will still refer to her as being the same person, but is she actually, or does that not count since technically she's not the same person? Also, while the original was a mutate, the clone was technically born with her powers. And clones or rebirthings have sometimes been considered by Marvel as being mutants. But yet again, keyword sometimes, because Ben Reilly isn't, nor is Kane. But also take Ms. Marvel's resurrection. She was killed, then reborn as a mutant via weird egg, which was technically not a resurrecting thing, but more of a cloning rebirthing. Meaning, since that makes Ms. Marvel a mutant, shouldn't this also make Vertigo a mutant? It's a bit of a conversation that's not really talked about, but it's interesting to think about. Maybe worth a story. I mean, it's been done, but not with Vertigo. Because, is Vertigo a mutant or not? That question becomes even more confusing as time goes on. Vertigo would continue to appear as a Marauder, but post-cloning we would get even less knowledge of her. Instead, kinda just turning into a villain who's there to be there. She would die a few more times, once being eaten by Predator X, and once being burned to death by Chamber. Also, Predator X is designed to murder mutants. Why would he eat her unless she was a mutant? Either way, she was later cloned again, and that clone was killed by Chamber. Last we've heard of Vertigo was confirmation that she's alive again, living on Krakoa. But she doesn't actually appear, only mentioned in Sabretooth issue 2 from 2022 as residing there. Krakoa is also a mutant state, so why would she be welcome to reside there unless she was also a mutant? Post Full of X and From the Ashes, she hasn't been seen nor mentioned. But regardless of if she died in those events, she's been brought back countless times before, so she's still around. Vertigo would also appear in Adaptation, first appearing in X-Men the Animated Series starting off as a Savage Land Mutate, as she does in the comics, where she would face off against Magneto and Professor X during the Savage Land arc in Season 2. She appears in her original comic costume that I don't like. I don't hate it, but I like the other one a lot more. She would later be recruited by Mr. Sinister into the Nasty Boys as the only female member, with this version of the Nasty Boys being more of an amalgamation of themselves and the Marauders as to why she's a member. She really doesn't do all that much outside of fighting the X-Men and is loyal to Mr. Sinister. She has a few lines and her powers are pretty useful against the X-Men. In fact, I would say that she's probably the most competent member of the team. But she really is just there to fill out the ranks, which does make sense since that is really the purpose of the character, even in the comics. She would also appear in Wolverine and the X-Men, where guess what? She fights Nightcrawler again, this time in a plot about Mr. Sinister kidnapping Jean and Scott, because he wants their genes, which is a very common thing for Mr. Sinister. The X-Men and the Marauders, of course, get into a confrontation because of this. Vertigo is shown to likely be the most powerful member of the group when fighting the X-Men, where for whatever reason, she really focuses on Nightcrawler, although she would be defeated by Emma Frost. Also, in this version of the Marauders, Arclight is a dude? How did I never notice that? I've once watched this series from start to finish before, albeit I was 9, so I probably didn't even know who Arclight was, but how did I never notice that until now? And finally, Vertigo would appear in the 2013 Deadpool video game, where the Marauders would appear now as only a trio, that of Vertigo, Arclight, and Blockbuster, who under the order of Mr. Sinister would kidnap a guy from a corrupt news organization. I'm not going to make any comment about that. Deadpool would kill Vertigo and the other Marauders when Sinister sent them after him. She's really only just there, but it is cool to see her in this game. And that's a wrap. I think Vertigo is a very interesting character in the fact that there's more holes in her story than answers. How did she get her powers back after fanfare? When did she join the Marauders? Why does she just change costumes interchangeably? Is she technically now a mutant? If not, why is sometimes she recognized as one? Also, what is her deal with Nightcrawler? However, with all that said, I think they're all interesting paths for the character. I think Vertigo's general cruelty is also very interesting, since a lot of X-Men villains do have some sense of empathy, but Vertigo doesn't. Vertigo is okay with killing children. Also, a handful of Marauders would later reform, but Vertigo never did. A lot of villains reform in the X-Men comics, but she never does. Her very baseline cruel personality, while a simple premise, is actually in itself pretty interesting. Her being a cold-hearted bitch makes her stand out among X-Men villains. Her power set is also pretty unique. I think it could work well against a telepath, although she doesn't really do that all that much. I mean, she has in the animated shows a bit with Emma Frost and Professor X, but not really in the comics. I would also like to know, what's the deal with Nightcrawler? Why is it always just on site with the two of them? A part of me wonders if that was even intentional or if it was just a coincidence they're always fighting. Right now, where she stands, she's really just there to round things out, but she could be more. Of course, she also doesn't have to be more, but at the moment I think the character's kind of just there. She exists, and she is useful in many situations when you need another villain, just toss her in. But at the same time, I definitely feel like you could build this character up a bit more. In conclusion, I think Vertigo has potential to be more, but at the same time, she could still just work in the same role she always has been, a fill-in villain for whenever you need one. What are your thoughts on Vertigo? Do you like her? Do you think that she's just a waste of a character? Do you think the character has promise or potential? And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!